I am super excited to be with you today and sharing how to use Queen & Company's die cutting guides. We have a brand new die cutting guide today. This is number 3, and I get the chance to be able to use it with our newest kit and take you step by step through how these die cutting guides can make card creation really fast and really easy, and also help you eliminate waste and be able to feel like you got a lot accomplished in a short amount of time. Now, as I said, this is number 3. We have 2 others, and if you are a member of Queen & Company's Royalty Facebook group, and anyone can join. If you're not a member yet, we'd love to have you in our Facebook group. You can find it by searching for Queen & Company Royalty on Facebook. But we have a files section in that group. And if you go to the files section and scroll down, you can find die cutting guide number 1 and die cutting guide number 2. They all work in similar fashions and show you how you can use our foundation dies, lay them out on your pattern papers, and come out with an amazing amount of cards at the end. All of our die cutting guides come with a supply sheet, and here you can see my supplies that I've picked out. I've got 5 pattern papers from the new Autumn Splendor kit that will be in place of the 5 papers you see in the die guide. The die guide will recommend some tone-on-tone, some pattern paper, and some cardstock that you will need in order to complete all of the 6 cards in this particular set. You can see that I've got polka dots just as the die guide suggests, as well as stripes like the die guide suggests, and my 3 tone-on-tone pattern papers in coordinating colors. And then some white cardstock will be used to cut some supporting shapes. And here you can see I've got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I've cut that in half, although later on I changed my mind and just cut it all from one sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. And then you're going to need 6 card bases in order to build your cards on that. Now, because of the kit that I'm using, I actually used a die from set 8 to cut some card fronts out of craft cardstock. This particular color just matched a little better what I had in mind for the particular colors of cards that I was doing. So I'm going to attach this to my card fronts before I build from the sketches onto my cards, but that's an optional step. You can do that if you like. You can see I noted that on the actual die guide that you can use white or a coordinating color for your card bases if you should choose to do something different than plain white. Now, one of the other supplies that you will need in order to follow along with the die cutting dies are Queen & Company foundation dies. And here I have a little printout showing you, obviously in tiny scale, what our die cutting foundation dies sets look like. Currently, we have released 18 sets, numbered sets, as well as a few specialty sets. And we have a few more coming. I got to cover those up because I'm not supposed to reveal those quite yet, so don't look too close. But out of these 18 sets that we have already put out, this particular die is unique because it is only going to use the first 4 sets of dies. So foundation sets 1 through 4 are the only ones being used in this particular die guide. Those sets have been out for a long time, and a lot of you already have them. So I'm hoping that that makes it easy for many more of you to be able to jump in and give these die cutting dies a whirl and see how fun they are. And if you don't have sets 1 through 4, it's certainly something that you can start picking up and adding to your collection. Foundation dies really just make everything easier when it comes to card making. Okay, so as I said, foundation sets 1 through 4 are used on this die guide, and you can see the numbers that are written on all of the shapes, and those numbers correspond to which set of dies you can find that shape in. So you see we have numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, when you see a 1, you're going to reference foundation set 1, etc. And that makes it easier to locate the dies when you get ready to actually go to work. So you can pull up your sets, find which number you need, and grab the corresponding shape from that die set. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get ready to dive in here. I'm going to make a little room on my desk so I can get the die cut machine out. And let's also go through and talk about a few of the notes that I have written on this particular die cutting guide. There's a couple of things that I did to maximize how much you could cut out of one paper that might be worth explaining a little bit. You can see I picked a green paper to represent the actual green paper in the die cutting guide. And you can see here two shapes overlap. You're going to want to cut the scallop circle out first, and then after you've cut the scallop circle, then you're going to want to grab that banner piece from foundation die set number 2 and cut it. And here with this banner piece from set 4, you're going to go ahead and let it kind of hang off the edge a little bit. We need it to be a little shorter anyhow, and this is the best way to make that particular shape fit as you cut it. So you'll see when I lay out my dies how I do that in just a second here. But first things first, let's go ahead and pull up the die cut machine. I'm using a Sizzix Big Shot. It's a plus, so it's extra large. It makes it a little easier when you're working with so many dies on one piece of paper, but you certainly do not need to have an extra large die cutting machine. Any of the die cut machines that will accommodate a 6-inch wide paper will work for this. I frequently use my Cuttlebug or my regular Big Shot when I am doing this. All right, time to get busy placing our dies. I am following the die guide to find the number set that I can pull these shapes from, these die shapes from, and then placing them where it says on the paper. You can see 3 is a duplicate, so of course we're only going to be able to cut that one time, that little circle, in one pass, and then after that first pass we can take a second pass. We will also cut the banner at the lower portion of that paper at that time. And you can see here that I have a little tool. If you've ever had a new cell phone, they give you this little tool to help put your SIM card in, and it's actually a really great little tool for poking your paper free from some of the dies. I have other tools too, but this one's just handy, and it's small and it sticks to my magnet, so I use it a lot. So here's our last couple of dies going into place now. We're going to go through and cut those out, and you'll see that even though a large portion of that lower banner die is missing, it's going to be all that we need. So no worries that it looks a little like something took a bite out of it. It's going to be just fine. There, you can see what I'm talking about. It's going to work. Just trust me on this one. All right, so now it's time to do the same thing with our next piece of paper. I'm using this red paper in place of the magenta that the die guide shows. And you can see that on this die guide, our banner from number 4 is going to hang off the edge a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. The sketch that we're going to use was designed to have that piece trimmed off anyhow. And you'll see that in order to get all of these shapes to fit, I couldn't even run them all through one pass. You know, the dies have a little lip around them that protrudes beyond the cutting area. And so I had to actually cut most of my shapes first with that, making sure that lip actually hung over the edge of my paper just a little bit to really get this to be an edge-to-edge cut. And then I'm about to remove that little rectangle. There you can see. I keep trying to get it in, but it's just not going to go. You're going to have to cut that separately. So set that little rounded rectangle aside. And then after you cut out your other shapes, if you truly got them all the way to the edge, then you'll be able to get that little rectangle, rounded rectangle through on the second pass. So here you go, first pass, and you'll see that we got them, all the shapes cut right to the edge, especially that large scalloped circle from foundation set number 1. Got it out, and there will be just enough room to spare to do a second pass with that rectangle. So there we go. We'll run that through the machine. You can see I'm using repositionable tape, low-tack repositionable tape to hold my dies in place. Anytime that you're working with multiple dies or really small dies, that's a really handy tool. I am actually using a magnetic platform underneath there, but sometimes things just want to shift anyways, and so you can see I use a lot of that repositionable tape to help me keep things exactly where I want, especially when I'm doing something like this where it actually really matters that things don't shift around and stay where they're supposed to be. So again, I am filling that paper nearly edge to edge in most places, following where the die guide says to place the dies from sets 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see that in this one, we're even putting that little tiny banner piece in the very middle of one of our one of our larger pieces. That won't matter because you won't see the middle of that paper once we finish designing our card. And so even though it looks a little strange right now, I promise no one will know but you and me after you finish making your card. As a matter of fact, here's one other thing we want to remember not to forget, is that there's an additional small piece that needs to be cut out of that large banner too from that paper. So you'll see that small little circle from number 3 has to get that second pass through so that you'll have all the shapes you need. And this striped paper is an easier one to cut because it doesn't quite have to be as edge to edge as some of the other ones, but you are going to have to make 2 passes because that small border on the right hand side, you're going to want 2 of those, and you use the same die to make those. So cut your first 4 shapes and then you can set those aside and go back and find that die and squeeze it into that little spot that you have left and cut a second border die or border shape with that die. There we go. Perfect. Okay, on to the next paper. This is our dots paper. And you can see that there is quite a few shapes that are going to fit on this paper. And thankfully, though, I think you get them all done in one pass here. So here I've got them all lined up according to what the die guy said. And just with a little shifting, a little taping to make sure nothing moves on me, I'm going to be able to cut them all in one pass. And here we go. All right, all cut. And now we can set those dies aside, create another little pile of my polka dotted die cut shapes, and get them ready for sorting as we get ready to make our cards here in just a minute. We're not quite done die cutting yet though. We still have our cardstock, our white cardstock. You could choose a different color. White, I use a lot of white. It's just a great way to put a focal point on because it kind of frames it and shows it off without competing with your focal point. So you can see I have a variety of various dies as well as some sentiment strips. And depending on what kit you're using and which stamps you want to use to coordinate with which shaker shapes, you may choose to do different sentiment dies. I've put some out here that I think look good in these particular designs, but they are by no means the only ones you could use. You could easily use circles or different shapes from different die sets. The foundation dies have lots of different dies that can be used for sentiments, so feel free to adapt this as needed to the shapes that you have in mind for the card designs you want to make. And we are finally all done with die cutting. Seems like a lot of die cutting, but it actually goes pretty fast once you get going. Look at all those dies. I can set those aside and put them away. And now it is time to sort. So pull up page 3 of the die cutting guide, and you can go card by card. At least that's what works best for me. Some people might do color by color, but for me, card by card helps me to be able to go fast at sorting these and making sure that I get all of the pieces where they need to be. So as I mentioned before, I'm using these craft bases for this particular set of cards. And I'm going to go ahead and grab those background banner dies. And then on top of that will be our scalloped rectangle, and from white, the smaller rectangle that layers on top of that, and one little accent circle. You might want a sentiment strip on that particular design, depending on how and where you want to stamp your card, or stamp your sentiment for your card. Okay, so card number 2, I'm gonna need that long, tall banner in both the stripes and the polka dots, and we're gonna put that striped paper up a little higher. We're gonna trim it just a little bit shorter than it was, and if you remember, our red paper is already shorter because we let it hang off the edge of our paper while we were die cutting. And our fun little hexagon piece, I am putting a pie on that hexagon piece, and it's just the perfect shape for framing something that's kind of long and rectangular the way a pie is. I love the pumpkin pie shaker in this particular set. And you can see here, the sketch is designed for a skinny sentiment, but a lot of those sentiments I might use for this particular shaker might be fatter. And so I probably am going to cut an additional sentiment strip that's fatter and use that one instead of the one on the die guide. So just an example of how you might adapt it to the needs of your particular card design. Okay, card number 3. Remember that hole? It's not going to show. We're going to cover it up good. And no one will know the better. Same thing with our little banner piece here. Almost looks like it's trying to smile at us. But no one will know except for you and me. Okay, cover that with the striped paper. And now our pretty scalloped red paper with its coordinating circle on top of that. And a couple little fun accent dies that you may or may not end up using. Sometimes I take them off because I feel like I don't need them after I get my focal points on, or because of the way my focal point is shaped, I end up deciding not to use them. You can see that in some of my finished projects that I sometimes opted to keep those circles and accents and sometimes decided to drop them. The choice is yours. Okay, next card. We're going to be layering these long border pieces together. So stripes on the bottom, polka dots on top, and for me this pretty turquoise is the one I want to stand out, so it's on top. But you could switch that order around if you wanted. All right, now a couple of fun little accent pieces on top of my red rectangle, and then our fun little banner. I really love a little string of banners, especially when they are made of all different papers. Kind of gets you a fun feel for the color mixes in this particular paper pad, at least this particular mix of turquoise and red and kind of a apple green. Okay, next card, card number 5. This one has a basic structure to it, using a couple of different papers in order to give it some interest and additional colors. So you've got your rectangles on top of a border die and another one of those fun little accents. And then you can choose with this one where you want your rounded rectangle to be. So you'll see on my finished example, I did some fall trees, and I actually moved that shaker or that white rectangle over quite a bit in order to accommodate their shape. But that's the beauty of adapting things to whatever cards you are making. And this is our final card design. Lots of layering going on here, again with hidden holes. But no one will be the wiser at the end because it's going to be a really cute card design. And this one, I think, gives you plenty of space where almost no matter what you do decide to use as a focal point, you're probably going to want that little accent piece to help anchor the colors in this particular design. And this one we're actually going to make. So I'm going to take the time to go ahead and start putting this one together. I have a love affair with foam tape, so you're about to see just how much I tend to use as I put together a set of cards. I use a giant roll because I burn through it pretty fast, but I love the extra dimension, and I love the way that it kind of can help separate layers from each other. Sometimes if you end up with a lot of busy papers or busy patterns, or like this particular background paper, a lot of colors and pattern going on, it can be helpful to have just that little bit of dimension to kind of help the eye separate the layers. And that way they don't start to look muddled running into each other. You can see here that I am using liquid glue. I use both tape runner and liquid glue, just depending on my mood, I guess. Sometimes I tend to gravitate more towards the liquid glue just because you get another second or two of forgiveness if you want to shift things around a little bit or scooch or shove just a little as you're laying down. Whereas with tape runner, you're often one shot and down. But the chance to be able to do just a tiny little bit of wiggle and wobble and straightening is helpful to me. So I use a lot of liquid glue on top of all my foam tape. So the liquid glue that I was using at the moment is art glitter glue, but I also go through a fair amount of sheer glue from Queen & Company. Those are probably my two favorites, but by far the thing I use the most is my foam tape. I do indeed go through quite a bit of that. And I hope that those of you that are type A are not disturbed by my very unevenness of my foam tape. It's going to be underneath where people aren't going to be able to see it, so I'm not very particular about how it looks. I guess if you were ever to disassemble one of my cards, you might be quite shocked at the sloppiness of the mechanics from the backside. But it has never seemed to bother the actual card design, and my recipients have always been happy, so I guess we'll leave things as is and try not to tell my type A friends just how bad my mechanics are from behind. Okay, so on this one I'm actually going to put Your Sweet stamp onto my little sentiment banner there, because I'm about to put a caramel apple shaker onto this card. So I'm using a stamping platform. This one is by We Are Memory Keepers. It is their mini stamping platform. I like these a lot because they're just the right size for stamping sentiments, which is the majority of what I stamp. But also because I like the spring action. I feel like I get a nice clean stamp that is super, super easy to get a second or a third impression if needed. So yeah, and sorry it's taken me so long there. I was trying to find my little brown ink stamping spot so I could have the right color. I like to color match the ink in my sentiments to the papers and the patterns that I'm using. And I have a pretty good selection of inks, but not a ton of brown, so it took me a minute to decide which one to use there. So you can see on this particular stamping platform, all I have to do is place down my sentiment strip and then get the stamp positioned and centered perfectly on there. And then I can go ahead and use the lid to pick up the stamp. I have a little flat tool, almost like a little flat emery board, where sometimes if the stamp is really sticky and my magnets aren't holding down the sentiment strip, I can use that just to kind of hold that little banner in place while I pick up my stamp and keep it from actually popping upward. So there we go, a little inking, looks pretty good, but I'm going to give it a second pass just to make sure that it's nice and clear and bold and easy to read. There we go, that looks great. So now I can get ready to add that to my card front. But first I'm going to clean off my stamp because I tend to forget if I don't do it right away. So I'm using my Queen & Company stamp chamois and my Queen & Company spray bottle to give it a quick wash down. I love that stamp chamois, and I love having the spray bottle right at my desk so I don't have to go into the next room for water or anything like that. I can just grab it, go, clean, and move on. I actually use that spray bottle and stamp chamois for a lot of things, but especially for working with small sentiments. Very handy stuff. So like I said, a lot of foam tape. So I'm going to pop up my sentiment here on foam tape. So I'm just cutting some small strips that'll fit on the back of that paper die cut. And we'll get that adhered towards the bottom of my card. I'm following the sketch for this particular card pretty strictly here, but certainly you could adapt it if you had a larger sentiment or if you had a different shape shaker that didn't quite fit as perfectly as you might like on that particular centerpiece. You could adapt as needed. But that's looking really cute there. Typically this sentiment is the last thing I add, but since I had already planned this particular card out, I knew I could go ahead and add it now before I took care of my focal point, my caramel apple shaker. Okay, so I'm pulling over my supplies that I will need from the Autumn Splendor kit to make my shaker, my caramel apple shaker. The Autumn Splendor kit has a lot of super cute fall shapes, Thanksgiving shapes in it. But one of my favorites is this caramel apple, probably because as a family, we often have a family night in October sometime where we sit down and actually make caramel apples together. And my kids have so much fun adding sprinkles and chocolate and all kinds of things to them. So a fun family tradition that I was happy to capture in a shaker form. Okay, so I've pulled over my smaller die cut machine since I'm working with much smaller amounts of dies at one time here. I am using the outline dies that go with this kit, along with some plain craft paper that give us a pretty good caramel color for our caramel apple here. Let's go ahead and run that through the machine. My machine wants to wiggle a lot today, I'm not sure why. But that will give us the base that we need for our shaker shape, as well as the decorative cover for our foam, so that we'll have that continuous caramel color for our shaker. And for this particular apple, I'm going to make it a red delicious. So I'm using a tiny, tiny bit of that red paper from our previous die cutting. There was just enough left that we could still use it and get one more useful piece out of it. This is going to be at the very top of our apple. It doesn't look like much by itself, but it's going to give us that little hint of apple peeking out from our shaker, or from the caramel of our shaker. So we'll finish that. And then the last step will be to cut out the popsicle stick at the top of our apple. So I've got a little bit of a lighter colored paper here that looks a lot like pine wood. And I'm cutting out that popsicle stick piece. And now we will be ready to assemble our shaker, which is the funnest part of the whole process, right? So for this particular shaker, let's see, I'm just making sure everything fits. It's always good to double check before you start peeling off your liners and exposing your adhesive to make sure that your foam is going to be facing the right direction. This shaker is not symmetrical, and so it's always good, especially with non-symmetrical shapes, to double check that you've got everything going the right direction before you start trying to adhere things down. Okay, now it's the fun part. Time to put our shaker toppings inside of our shaker. Now the Autumn Splendor kit comes with a wide amount of colors that match the pattern papers of Pearlies. And I think that sounds like perfect little imitation sprinkles for our caramel apples. So I'm going to pull out a variety of colors in kind of blue and some turquoise and red, some whites, anything that looks good and matches our little color scheme of our card here. And the kit does come with green Pearlies, but I've made a lot of cards already with this kit. And so you'll see me in a little bit. I'm going to pull out some green Pearlies from a bottle that I had, but that's just because I'd already used up the greens in my kit. So I like this particular shaker to be about medium full. I don't want to overdo it, but I don't want to underdo it either. When our kids make caramel apples, they make a pretty good sized mess with sprinkles that go everywhere because they want to cover those apples pretty much head to toe. So I'm going to fill this shaker up pretty full. Okay, and then here is the pre-cut acetate covers that come in the kit. And again, I'm just going to kind of make sure that I have it going the right direction. And I'm going to use my trusty spray bottle to spray some water, mist it a little bit on my acetate, and then I'm going to wipe it off. That really helps cut down on static. So if you have problems with static, a little misting with your spray bottle and a little wipe down can often help remove a lot of the static that might be on your acetate and keep those little pearlies from trying to jump around while you're putting your cover onto your shaker. All right, things look good, no static. I think we're ready for the next step, which would be gluing our decorative covers on top of our foam. Usually you only have one cover on top of the foam. You might have other accents, but this time you're going to see that the traditional piece that we use to cover our foam isn't going to cover all of the foam. It's only going to cover part of it because I wanted that extra foam to be there to help support the top of your apple, which I'm about to glue on. Oh yeah, that's right. Make sure you get that popsicle stick in. I keep forgetting that. It's the second or third time I've made the apple, and almost every time I want to forget to put that little popsicle stick in first. But if you can get the popsicle stick down, then you can add your little apple piece on top of the foam, and you'll have your foam all covered up and looking proper. Okay, that is looking pretty good. Now we can get ready to go ahead and attach this to our card. A little bit of glue should do the trick there. And then once we get that glued down, then we'll get to my second favorite part of card making, which is adding all of the embellishments. And if you've seen my cards before, then you know that I'm a pretty big fan of bling and embellishments, and I add them to just about everything because I think they add a lot of interest and extra detail and dimension. And so you'll see that I don't really have a lot of rhyme or reason, but I like to scatter some fun bling across all my cards. And thankfully, Queen & Company, you couldn't ask for a better place to be able to find the cutest bling and buttons and embellishments anywhere. And they're all in a wonderful rainbow of colors, so I never have trouble finding things that coordinate and match well. This time I'm using some lollies in kind of a turquoise and green to kind of create a visual triangle around my shaker and help draw the eye around my shaker, as well as add some interest and dimension. And now I have some glitter epoxy dots in red and turquoise and a little bit of green. I'm going to add those across my card and help kind of complete my little triangle pattern a little bit. I think I'm prone to perhaps adding too much bling. I frequently find myself putting a few little accents down and only to take them back up by thinking, okay, too much. Gotta know when to stop. And usually I overdo it before I remember, oh, back off. And thankfully you usually get a few minutes before the adhesive is really, really stuck down where you can change your mind without any damage. So I think I'm going to add just a little bit more to the bottom there, to the sentiment, because I've got a fair amount of space left over, and I think it'll look good to fill it here. So I've got these red matte epoxy dots. I'm going to go ahead and add those as accents on the card. And that looks really quite cute. I think we're just about done. I'm going to go ahead and add my card front to my card base to complete my card. Kind of finish it up and make sure it is polished and ready to be sent. Again, I'm just using liquid glue, especially for this step. I really prefer liquid glue because getting a card front that is a different color than your card base to perfectly line up with a tape runner can be a bit of a challenge. So I prefer the liquid glue for that step especially. And I think we could add a little something extra here. Obviously, this is not something that's in the die guides, but you're always welcome to add a little bit of extra embellishments. This time I'm going to add a little bit of this red baker's twine, just tying myself a little bow. I think that would just add a little bit of softness and extra character to the card here. So I'm going to tie a cute little bow. I'm not going to tie it around the stem. We're just going to make it look like it's going around that, well, not stem, around the popsicle stick. But I'm just going to glue it down to the stick there. Too much hassle to try to tie it actually around there. And now my card really is complete. And I'm not going to take the time today to go through and work through each one of the other cards. I've actually already done that using this die guide with slightly different papers. You can see that here, the color scheme's just a little bit different. So you can see how they would look all finished with slightly different colors. And here you can see I did add an extra background paper that's not in the die guide. You can adapt that way as well. You can see I left the circles off and sometimes left them on. But in general, I made very few alterations to the way that the sketches are. In fact, I think that one's not even really altered at all. But all of them have their bling and embellishments added wherever I thought looked best. You can see again, I scooted some of those things around just a little bit, some of the pieces around just a little bit. But very little adaptation was needed, just a few little nudges here and there or accents off here or there. So here's just a little bit closer look at a couple of those cards, just so you can get a feel for how they turned out and how they look with all their extra bling and dimension added to them. And I believe we promised a bit of a sneak peek. So shall we take a little peek at our upcoming Christmas kit? We had a lot of requests to see a little bit of a peek at what would be inside of it. And so here we go. Come check out the cuteness that is soon to be the homemade holiday kit. Now, like I said, this is a Christmas kit, so I think you can figure out the theme. And perhaps that means you could take a couple of guesses at what other shapes you might think are coming out in this upcoming, I think it's called Homemade Holidays Kit will be the name of this kit. So more information and more details about what you will find in that kit to come, but feel free to start your guessing. No promises that we'll respond, but it's fun to see what you think we might have coming out. Okay, well that is a wrap on my tutorial for how to use our die cutting guides and the closer look at the Autumn Splendor Kit and die cutting guide number 3. It was a lot of fun to work with, and we got a lot accomplished in a short amount of time. And again, if you want to find these guides, you need to be in our Facebook group called Queen & Company Royalty, and you need to go to the Files tab. Scroll down and take a look for the different pages there, and you can print those pages out and give these die cutting guides a try. Thank you for joining me today. Bye.